Commencing countdown.
3, 2, 1.
This is the contracting experience, connecting government contracting professionals to the world around them through conversations with acquisition influencers, insights into evolving hot topics, and sharing lessons learned from the field.
This next episode of the podcast is with Captain John Diekel, who is an Air Force active duty contracting officer currently assigned to Data Collective Venture Capital, or DCVC, and Gothams as an Air Force Institute of Technology Education with Industry, or EWI Fellow. At DCVC, Captain Diekel executes due diligence of startups with dual-use technologies, vying for venture capital funding. In addition, Captain Diekel helps startups with dual-use technologies navigate the DoD acquisition landscape in hopes of winning contracts as Gotham's contracting subject matter expert. In this episode, Captain Diekel shares his experience in the EWI program and how he will apply what he's learned to bolster Air Force missions and U.S. national security. Welcome, Captain Diekel, to the podcast.
Hey, thank you.
So, Captain Diekel, you have been participating in the Air Force Institute of Technology's Education with Industry, or EWI program, for the last 10 months. Can you talk about what you were doing before the program and why you wanted to get involved in working with industry?
Absolutely. So first, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak with everybody today. Before the program, my first assignment was at Holloman Air Force Base at the 49th Contracting Squadron. I worked extensively in the commodities and services section. So everything from being a basic buyer, punching, single purchase orders and learning how to do my first BPAs, all the way through, being a seasoned contracting officer, earning, my warrant, executing it quite a bit. Everything from, those complex services that kind of take a long time to learn, all the way through, the simple commodities. Did some R&D stuff, with the test group out there. So I really had a really, really good diverse litany of experiences at Holloman. I learned from some incredible people there, which is kind of the whole reason why I'm here in all reality. I think about, my mentors, Miss Sally Roberts or Mr. Robert Widows, like the flight chief and the team lead out there. They really taught me everything I know about contracting and the importance of being an officer in contracting and also being a contracting officer. After that, I did a short tour in Turkey where I ran the contingency support flight for the 39th Contract Squadron. So I was there from 19 to 20, from August of 19 through August of 20. And the big things we did there is we were surging up the forward deployed sites, so to speak. And then when the former president gave the pull-out order for Syria, we ran all the contracting, to pull all of the line haul services and all of the equipment out of there. It's actually funny. We couldn't even get all of the equipment onto the base with our contracts because the Turkish nationals wouldn't let us drive on because it was such a short notice contract. But we ended up calling all of our Army counterparts, and they actually came out. They unloaded the trucks and drove, the different kind of equipment right down the road in Turkey. So it was actually a pretty cool experience. Yeah. And then your second question there about, what made me want to get involved working with industry. I've always had an inkling that there's a better way to do business. I've always had an inkling that the government is complicated. And I didn't really understand how complicated it was, or I couldn't really truly empathize with non-traditional contractors vis-a-vis startups or venture capital, things of that nature. The non-traditional industry partners that we have, I didn't understand fully how different their world is to ours. But I had an inkling that there has to be a better way. There must be a way for us to move faster and be more efficient and more effective, and ultimately build the defense industrial base. So I figured EWI is probably a good place to learn, whether I'm learning from a big company, a new company, something. I just knew there was something out there, and I didn't know enough context to know, all the things I know now. So really, I'm kind of fortunate that the program worked out for me because it's been a huge, huge experience in my life, not only in professionally, but personally as well.
For sure. So with that said, what organizations have you been working with during this time, and what type of work have you been doing?
So for me, I have a really unique position. Like I said, kind of in the non-traditional defense industrial base sector. So I have 3 primary roles at 2 different companies. I'll kind of explain my way through that, but it's a little complicated, so I'll take my time. So role 1 is at Data Collective Venture Capital, or DCVC. DCVC is a venture firm that invests in paradigm shifting technologies early in the startup stage. So think about really before the product or the company has built the product and is generating money, they're kind of in the process of developing their product or service. That's when we invest at DCVC. So I'm an analyst there. So I kind of look through any of their, dual use capable technologies and think about, okay, does this make sense for the government? Is there a real use case? What's the value proposition for the government? Because DCVC or any venture firm doesn't want to invest their money into a company that won't ultimately turn back, get contracts, generate revenue, and ultimately return money to its shareholders and investors.
Mm-hmm.
So effort 1 is, I'm an analyst at DCVC. Effort 2 is I'm the contracting expert at Gothams. Gothams is a startup consulting firm that kind of works with some of these venture capital firms like DCVC or AFIT, some of these folks who get this money, these startups get the investment money from these venture firms. And then they say, okay, what's next? We know we have a use case for the government, but I'm an engineer and a founder, and I've never worked with the government before. Or I'm a technical founder, and I don't know what a DUNS number is or what SAM is. Or, in some cases, I'm a founder and I don't understand the need to work with the U.S. government for defense contracting. I don't understand the importance. So I'm the contracting expert at Gothams, where I teach founders, at the C-suite level about, the importance of working with the government, enjoying the defense industrial base, and kind of clearing the way, clearing up some of the convoluted nature of what we do. Is because to them, what is SAM? What is a DUNS number? Why do I need a DUNS number and a cage code? What is GSA? What organizations inside the Air Force actually, would require the goods or services that my startup creates. So that whole consulting piece on the contracting side is kind of where I fit in at Gothams. My third role, which is probably the most unique role, is I'm the chief of staff for the founder and CEO of Gothams, who is also a partner at DCVC, which is kind of why I have one foot in each side of the road here. So my boss, Matt Mickelson, I'm his personal chief of staff to think about like an executive officer for a colonel or a general, where I'm with him in the meetings at the big board, big girl tables, where deals are getting signed, or we're interacting with high level government, political figures, or leaders inside of industry. So I really had this really unique experience where I get to touch 3 different roles, all towards that same mission of developing dual use technologies. Dual use meaning, between commercial and government use cases. So I get to see from the investment piece, I get to see from the consulting to striving for and winning contracts piece, and then tertiary I get to see from the leadership piece as I get to sit with the CEO of the company.
Cool. So what has surprised you most in working with DCVC and Gothams?
So this might be a bit of, my personal upbringing shining through here, but, I kind of pictured the folks that have the multi-million dollars, the $1 billion, in their portfolio or in their bank accounts. I always kind of picture them as being, mean people that were just trying to out there make money and, didn't really care about America in the same way that you and I do, Amber, right? Like, I'm an active service member, you're a civil servant. Like, we are intimately familiar with national security. We are intimately involved in national defense. And I just assume that most people are just out there trying to make money. And in this sector is so far different than, national security, they just probably don't even care. But the biggest thing I've learned is that it doesn't matter how much money you make or what walk of life you come from or what you look like. There are people who care about national security all over the place. There are patriots everywhere. And there are people in this industry who I've met that also care intimately about patriotism and helping out. Like I had a conversation this morning with, a very prominent founder, and he told me, I don't really care about how much money we make. I want to figure out how to help. Like, how can I help? Which I just think that's so incredible It's because it's just so stark from what I expected.
Mm-hmm.
And then, from the, that's just like a personal thing. Then what I've learned most on the side of actual business, right? We're all here as mission-focused business leaders within contracting. So from a business perspective, what I've learned most is that it's really, really, really hard for these venture capitalists to invest money into defense startups or dual use startups, because it's really hard for them to project expected returns or rate of return, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let me dig into that a little bit. What I mean is the venture capital firms or any investor invest their money into a company with the expectation that they'll be able to return multiples of that investment to their investors. Except you and I both know it's really hard to award a contract, right? You have to do your market research, then you have to do your solicitation, then you have to award the contract. But that's really complicated when we get into, the different FAR parts or non-FAR based vehicles, or the different tools we use, or even the different systems you have to log into, kind of alluded to earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest thing I've learned is it's really hard to invest in this technology, which is vital to national defense, because contract is really hard to understand from their perspective, with no context on, being a contracting ninja like all of us are. So,
Right.
So what I've learned is that we really need to focus in on how can you and I tactically and tangibly every day make our processes as clear and as simple, as concise as possible. That way, it's easier for these non-traditional companies like startups or any sort of company that hasn't worked with the government before. I would make it super, super easy for those folks to understand our process, post for a contract, then ultimately win a contract award by being, the best value to the government.
Mm-hmm.
Because then once we show that these venture capitalists and these different sorts of investors that, hey, we're awarding contracts in big chunks to these different kinds of companies, it's not all going to traditional defense contractors, even though those traditional partners are extremely important as well. Once we show the investors that the government are giving contracts to these non-traditional, the investors will then see, okay, well, there is a way to project rate of return. There is a way to see that the company that I invest in that does defense, has a defense-based business, will return my money, return my investment, and ultimately, make my shareholders money. So that for me, it was really enlightening to see tactically how that whole process works, because I had no idea. I had no context. I was not a startup guy. I get to sit with a lot of high-level people in the industry and the government side, both political and, militarily, but I had no idea how any of it worked. So it's been incredible for me to see that, what I do with my warrant as a KO truly does affect not only the company that I award the contract to and the companies I don't award contracts to, but also the companies who are just vying for investment, who are in the initial stages, building a company in their garage, trying to get investment from these different investors.
Right. So what have you learned from industry that if we could implement it and the government could highly benefit our Air Force and its missions?
Wow, that's such an amazing question. So I think about that one, and I think about all the things that we have to do, right? The different clauses we have to include, the different parts of our contracts. I think about all that stuff, and it's very difficult, right? Like it's cumbersome. Our solicitations are, 100 pages, 200, 150 pages for whatever project, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever program. So I think about just the manner in which industry on this side within the startup ecosystem really thinks. They think about efficiency and what will actually make sense. What can I do as an individual that will help our team win? So I'm thinking a lot about now is how do you actually make things more efficient so those folks in the startup ecosystem can be effective and actually feel like they're doing something rather than going through the slog of, having to read 150 pages. I'm thinking a lot about now, like the different contracts I've read from B2B, business to business contracts, or B2G at the non-federal level that I've read. They're just more concise. I've seen, RFPs that have been 5 pages, 10 pages, which like was scary to me at first. I was alarmed. I'm like, wait, what? Like how is that even possible? Because obviously, state governance is different or B2B is different. But then when you read, it's like, oh, okay, like they're just saying everything that needs to be said, but nothing more. And obviously, we had to have certain protections in all of our RFPs and all of our solicitations in general and contracts for all of our folks. But I think we need to just take an internal look at how can we be super efficient and effective with what we're putting out there on the street and how we're reaching out. Because another thing I think about a lot as well is I think about the government point of entry, beta spam, formerly FBO. And that's amazing, right? For everybody who travels there. But non-traditional contractors probably aren't going to travel there if they don't know it's there, right? The folks with the amazing technologies that we want to contract with, they might not even know what beta SAM is. I'm thinking more about, where are all these folks located? And what I've learned is everybody interacts on LinkedIn very frequently. So I'm thinking now, like, how do we post solicitations or maybe post a link to our solicitation that we post on the beta SAM? Maybe we start posting those as well to LinkedIn and just sharing them with some of our industry partners, just who we're connected with. Yeah. How can we actually reach these folks who just may not know we exist? Like, we might be the perfect mission partner for them to build their business, and they might be the perfect mission partner for us to build our mission capability or our readiness with.
Yeah, and so you alluded to some of the challenges you've seen, but can you give like some first case examples that you've seen in working with those companies of challenges that some of these other companies have had trying to do business with the government?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people get conflated in this question with, oh, these are things that we need to fix because we, the government, are bad, or we, the contract officer, are bad, or we, the acquisition team, are slow. But it's really not the case. I really don't believe that anybody wakes up every day, puts on their uniform, or, takes their CAT card out at the gate as a civil servant and says, I'm going to be bad for next security day. I'm not going to give my best effort. Like, I just don't believe that. I think a lot of it just comes down to, we don't understand industry and they don't understand us. So that's really been my biggest interaction, my biggest learning point has been, we need to take some time and really think about, okay, what actually is a startup and how do they function? What is their lives like? While simultaneously also teaching them, like, hey, this is our life. This is what a contract looks like. This is what it is. This is complicated. For example, thinking about who is the contracting officer in charge of program X, right? Let's say, F-16 avionics. How do I, as a founder, figure out who that is? And I try to look at org charts, or I try to Google, and obviously like a lot of that stuff is, not on open source, which thankfully so. But how do we connect these folks? And I think about, man, just trying to figure out who to talk to about how to do business development within the government is extremely complicated. And I'm looking here, Amber, at some of the emails I've sent back and forth over the last couple months of us working together, and I'm looking at your office code. If I'm a founder, what does your office code mean? What is a PK? Right. So I think taking that step towards hyper empathy towards these non-traditional contractors and think, okay, how can I make my processes super easy? So it's super clear that, hey, I'm a contracting officer and I can help you find, another contracting officer to do business with because we've met on LinkedIn, or we've met at a Spark cell, or we've met at some sort of industry engagement event. It's so hard, even with me, you know what I mean? And I've kind of tested this theory a little bit using my government email, reaching out to random contracting officers or random program managers. And it's hard because program manager, contracting officer X and Y have their own requirements to execute. They have their own things to do. Like, who is this random, LT or captain or, GS12? Like, who is this person? Like, why are they asking about, what project I'm working on? Like, this is strange. I have other things to do. I actually have to get this solicitation on the street, or I need to, review this past performance. So thinking more about that, really, like, how do you navigate those waters? This is so complicated. And I think that I'm starting to build this thesis around, what Lieutenant Colonel Chase Eisenman and Michael Pillar are doing with the Rapid X program that General Holtz put together, how to connect the different installations, the different OLs to the non-traditional contractors. I think it's quite brilliant. I think that's a major piece about it. So I really think the biggest hurdle is trying to figure out who to contact.
Yes.
Because if you don't know, you don't know. You don't know what PK or what PKA or B or Z means, and every cons is something different. What's the difference between a cons and an S-cons or an ESF?
Right.
Like it's just so complicated. So I think figuring out who to contact is probably the biggest hurdle I've seen. And then I think, secondly is that educational piece where they don't know about us and we don't know about them. But I mean, hats off to, everything that General Holt's doing and, everything that you're doing here specifically on this podcast, right? Because that's what, separate lines of effort, that's what you guys are getting after is, how to educate the workforce or educating industry partners to say, hey, this is who we are and this is who they are and how do we connect those nodes, which I think is really remarkable.
Right. Well, and you and I have talked a little bit about this offline, but even when I did like the fellowship with that startup company in DC 2 years ago, I talked to some of the startups that they were working with, and it was the same thing. They wanted, like you said, they were eager to help solve national security problems. They just wanted to know, like, who can I talk to help them figure out, ask them what their problems are so I can help them figure out how to solve them, and they were coming from, it was very refreshing to talk to them because they were eager and they just wanted to know, like, who can I talk to? So I think that's great that, what RapidX is doing. It's definitely needed, and I'm sure it's not easy, but it's definitely a necessary piece of this puzzle. And then what people like you are doing, working with these companies and just getting this other perspective, because it helps draw the line between like the people that are, in the program offices or, the contracting officers and the specialists out there that are doing the day-to-day work. Like you said, they don't have time to necessarily go do all this deeper work and to figure out what these companies are doing. But if they take from what your experience, what you've had, and some of the things that you've laid out, it helps bring that awareness that at least then they know, oh, I can ask some more questions of, here's some additional companies that might be able to help me out. Let me ask these guys some questions and contact them. Or let me even just look at my process where, I'm putting this solicitation out. If I amend it, several times, is that going to be a pain in the butt for these startups who actually don't have the manning to keep looking at my one particular posting to see if I've changed it so they can make sure they submit it properly?
That's an amazing point.
Just things like that where it's like, I never even really took that into account until I worked on the other side. And I'm like, oh yeah, this stinks. If they keep changing this, then we got to keep looking. But we're at, this is just one posting. There's so many other, government customers out there that we're trying to work with and all that stuff. So, I think it's important work that you're doing and that you've done, and just the fact that you're bringing it back. And so I would definitely want to mention the webinar that you did on May 19th, 2021. And so for the Air Force folks out there listening, if you go to Air Force Contracting Central's homepage, on the left-hand side, you can scroll down to webinars and click on that, and then you'll see the Demystifying Venture Investing webinar that Captain Diekel did. And there's two separate recordings posted there, but I highly suggest that you go and check that out. Some really good information on just goes more in depth into some of the stuff that you've learned and how our contracting and our acquisition folks can apply that to what they're doing every day. So what are you taking away from this experience, and how will you use what you've learned in your next Air Force position?
What have I taken away from this experience? Wow, there's so many things I could say. I've really taken away so many things personally and professionally, everything from, how I carry myself, not as just a contract officer, but an actual businessman in industry, because that's what you and I are. We're businessmen and women. And I don't really think of myself in that way until this role. I think about that quite a bit. But what is the biggest thing I take away? I think I'm really going to focus on market research. I have this hypothesis that if we actually do rigorous market research, and I know I've talked to some great folks at AFIT, about what they're doing with the business intelligence tool and things of that nature. I'm thinking that if we do real market research, not to say anyone's doing, fake market research, but, full disclosure here, when I did market research in the past, sometimes the requirement's urgent. It's like, okay, like I got my market research form. Can I get, 3, 4, 5, vendors, written down on this market research form so I can, move out, so I can move out and get something on the street. My mission partners need it. But I think really taking the time to inject quality up front in the market research to really investigate it, and when I say market research, I don't mean just, all right, this company lists that they do this service or they've done the service or provided the widget, to the government in the past. But maybe I need to go talk to some founders or go talk to somebody at these companies a little more rather than just, okay, yep, here's my market research email or here's my sources sought. Cool. These industry partners responded. Yep, I'm good to go on my form. My KO will sign it.
Right.
So I'm thinking more about market research. I'm going to do market research much, much better because I'm actively going to work towards finding startups that can fill, and not even just startups, but non-traditional contractors that can fill, my program or fulfill my requirements. That way I can start getting some of these contracts awarded to these non-traditionals and making it easier for venture capitalists to see the actual rate of return, the expected rate of return from investing in these startups. Because that's really where the investment piece is. The investors will not put their money behind companies if they don't think they can make their money back for their shareholders, which makes sense. If I was investing in a fund or in a company, I wouldn't just give my money away to a company I didn't know could return and make me money, right? Same thing that you and I do with our TSPs. So I'm going to do market research much better. I need to really sit down and reflect on, my past experiences with how I've done market research in the past and really think about, okay, what does market research look to John Diekel, contracting officer, from this day forward? When I put my name on a contract and it says United States of America underneath it, I need to be able to say, okay, I've exhausted every possible avenue to find the most cutting edge technology created by the most elite companies, either young companies or old, either traditional or non-traditional. So I'm going to really take a hard look at that. So while there's many things I could say as the biggest takeaways, it really just comes down to how do we get more non-traditional contractors on contract building cutting edge technology? Well, you have to increase investment. How do you increase investment? By showing investors that, we reward cutting edge technology with contracts. So I'm going to do more market research. My market research is going to be much more focused.
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting point because when you said that, it made me think of because are we actually even buying the right things, right? If we just buy the same thing we bought last year and the year before that and the year before that, maybe we're not getting the best technology or the most capable, things or services that we need. Because maybe we have maybe we're actually trying to solve a different problem, but since we're trying to just recycle what we've done in the past, are we actually going to meet those needs? And so you mentioned talking to some other, companies or startups, you might get a better idea of what new technologies even out there that we could buy.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think there's a lot of credence to that argument of what are we trying to buy? And is it truly the most cutting edge? Because, I'll be honest here, as a contracting officer, I don't know the most about aircraft sustainment or, satellite procurement. I don't know what a satellite needs to do. I'm not that level, but at the end of the day, FAR Part 10002 says, I shall conduct market research and it shall be continuous and ongoing. And I've really thought more about that phrase, continuous and ongoing. I don't know that I can agree, with your sentiment about when I'm doing acquisitions. I don't know if I can agree with your sentiment that I am buying the most cutting edge technology. I don't know that because I'm not doing enough market research. I'm not engaging with market research. I wish we could change FAR Part 10 from market research to market engagement. Just find out, talk to them, because you're absolutely right. Because I don't know a lot of times if I'm buying the most cutting edge stuff, which, in some situations, okay, I get it. There's unusual and compelling circumstances I got it. In those kind of situations, we're trying to move out and move fast for our mission partners. But for our technologically critical programs and offices, yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of times we may not know for sure whether we're buying the most cutting edge technology. And sometimes we probably are, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to discount everyone's efforts here or, speak negative about everybody or say that our community is bad or I'm bad as contracting officer. What I'm saying is I think we don't know. And if we can't say for sure, yes or no, this is the most elite technology in return to my warfighter because I have talked with this investor, that investor, and these three founders, and they all said this is the cream of the crop technology. And, I've also read this report and that report that also say that this is the cream of the crop technology. Then I don't know if we can say that, which is a daunting thing because obviously all of us are busy and none of us need more work. I know everybody in contracting is super busy, self-included. So no one wants to ask for more work or take more time, but I really think it matters. I had a former commander used to say, if you inject the quality up front, you get the efficiency and effectiveness on the back end. And that applies to your acquisitions in your personal life and your professional life. It applies in all things. And I think about that more and more in the context of market research to, figuring out if the technology is right, how to get the technology of these non-traditional contractors, into our warfighters' hands, which ultimately shows these investors that, hey, they need to pour on the money to these non-traditional defense contractors. That way we can truly, secure national security for the long term. I think you're right. That's a very good point.
Well, and I think, and I'm with you, like people are busy. And so this can get a little, I think, overwhelming if you're like, okay, now you need to go like learn everything and who's all in the space. But yet you got to get all these contracts awarded. So I don't think we're saying that. I think what we're trying to get to is that, it's worth asking some questions and maybe contacting a couple more people because if anything, you're just going to learn more about what you're actually trying to buy, right? You're going to learn about and that goes back to the mission focused business leaders of understanding your requirement. I mean, if you learn a little bit more about it, that could help you down the line, whether you buy the most, technological can do everything widget or you buy, what you originally thought you needed to begin with, because you're like, okay, no, there are things out there can do this other stuff, but this is what we need. And this is what we need to meet the mission and it can support what we need. So if anything, I don't want people to think we're like, oh yeah, you need to go like do this whole other strategy and all this stuff. It's just making yourself more educated and familiar with what you're actually buying, which is going to help you in your procurement, I think, through the long haul.
I totally agree. That makes a lot of sense. And the thing I would add there is something that you and I haven't touched on yet, but I've talked about a lot, just individually, is the fact that it's about knowing your requirement, but also knowing the tools in your toolkit. Like, for example, before I came down here, I didn't really understand, truly what a SIBR was or what an OT was, or really what OT even stands for as the other transaction, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's such a vital piece as well, is understanding all the tools in our toolkit of like, okay, this may not be the thing that I need today, but I might need this in 5 years from now. Who can I contact at AFWorks, or who can I contact within the R&D community to say, hey, like this might be something that we want to keep an eye on in the future. I think owning all of our tools and our contracting ninja tool belt is so important as well. Just, again, shame on me for not knowing those things. But, now that I know, I've got to really figure out how to learn more about those and how to learn from more people in our community who've exercised those vehicles. You know what I mean?
For sure. And it's a process. I mean, I think especially when you're in a different offices, you try to be the expert in that specific space. And so it can be easy to kind of go down the path that's already been laid, right? But you've shown like, hey, learning new things, working with different people. I mean, that's how you do it. And so just by, telling people what you've learned through this podcast and through the webinar, I think is great. And so just lastly, I just wanted to hit a note that I took in your first recording of the webinar. And you had said something along the lines of what you want contracting folks to take away. And you said, we need to award more contracts to startups with good tech. Venture capitalists be more likely to invest. It will help build up our industrial base. and it will better protect our national security. So can you just give like a little bit of context behind that and how you've seen that happen when working with DCVC and Gothams?
Absolutely. The example I'll use here is a Gothams example for a little small COVID testing company called Curative. Last March, it was, 7 employees. That's it. Year to date, they've done, multi-billion dollars in business in the last year. And there's over 7,000 employees right now. From a startup consulting standpoint, Gothams, we are intimately involved, and I help teach a lot of their capture programs or a lot of their contracting personnel about what a contract is and how to read it. How do you read an RFP? How do you respond, et cetera, et cetera. So I think about that situation, right? Cool story. But the true context there is, well, simply, this company started, Dr. Roper and General Holt with the DAF Act said, hey, we need to figure out COVID testing immediately because it's an emergency, right? They went with Curative, they went with a couple others for different, testing, it's different, logistics, different, manufacturing capabilities for PPE. And now Curative grew into a huge company that provided over 25 million COVID tests nationally, which I think is remarkable. So that's the kind of thing that can happen, when we move nimble. I would use the DAF Act and General Holt's team as the prime example of, here is a non-traditional contractor. There was 7 employees. Gothams came in with a little bit of venture money, a little bit of assistance, a little bit of mentorship and leadership from a different perspective, taught those folks how to get DoD contracts, got a contract with the Department of Air Force and Dr. Roper and General Holt's team. And then they used that money, they took off to help, not only provide tests to all of us inside the DoD, but also to, 25 million tests within a year is pretty remarkable. So I think that's a prime example of how we can move more nimbly as a contracting workforce to award contracts to non-traditional contractors, which ultimately leads to better national security. We could get into more, national security focused, examples, but I think that's the easiest one, the most relevant one based on recency and relevancy, right?
For sure.
But, when our workforce puts our minds to it, we can do amazing things. And that is the biggest example of us teaming with the non-traditional defense industrial base to mobilize and help America, even though it was against an internal threat vis-a-vis a virus.
For sure. No, thanks for sharing that example. That's great. Well, Captain Diekel, I want to thank you again for being on the podcast. It's been fun to get to know you, in preparation for this, I had fun having you on the podcast as well.
Yeah, thanks, Amber. I appreciate all you do. And I really do think that what you're doing here with the podcast and what the different folks we've worked with on the webinars, I really think this is the stuff that's going to make a difference. I really adamantly think that nobody wakes up, puts on their uniform, or drives to the gate and says, I'm going to do things that are not in the best effort for national security. I think a lot of people just make mistakes or don't understand. And that's kind of my whole position is I just didn't understand this whole defense industrial base problem or moving faster. I've seen Dr. Roper and General Holt speak and not really understand. And I've met Colonel Diller and I've seen him speaking on the videos. I don't really understand. But I hope that this helps people understand that, hey, this is how to actually move faster. Just go meet the people, go have empathy, think about it from their perspective, teach them about our perspective, how hard it is to get contractors to come work with us. So I really think what you're doing, what the webinar folks are doing, they're truly amazing. So thanks for having me.
If you have suggestions for topics or people to interview or feedback on the podcast, you can submit those at thecontractingexperience@gmail.com. I want to thank you all for listening to the Contracting Experience podcast. Until next time, keep connecting to the world around you.